My name is William. I'm 11 years old and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. If you asked me until recently what I believed in, I would have said nothing. Not that I was angry or sad. I just grew up hearing that life was just that. Being born, growing up, studying, working and dying. My parents are university professors, super rational. Here at home, God was just another character from old stories like Zeus or Hercules. The Bible? I never read it. Church? I never went to church. And Jesus was just a name I heard in movies or on the streets when someone tripped. At school, I avoided any conversation about faith. When a classmate talked about what they believed, I would say, "That's just to make you feel better." I sounded smart. I sounded mature. But in reality, I didn't even know what I was saying. Everything began to change on an ordinary autumn afternoon. It was a Friday, and our 6th grade class was going on a field trip to a camp near the Blue Ridge Mountains. The place was beautiful, full of trails, lakes, and huge pine trees that seemed to touch the sky. I was excited not by nature, but by being away from books for 2 days. Around 4 in the afternoon, we were allowed to swim in the lake. I didn't even know how to swim properly, but I jumped in anyway, laughing with my friends, until everything went black. I slipped on a submerged rock and hit my head. I felt the world spin, the water swallow me. I tried to scream, but water came into my mouth. My arms flailed, my feet searched for the ground. I didn't find it. That's when I realized I was dying. But the strangest thing, when I stopped fighting, an absurd peace came. A silence I had never felt. No pain, no fear, just emptiness. And then, a light. I know. It sounds like something out of a movie. I would think it was ridiculous too, until it happened to me. This is just the first part of the story, and believe me, what I saw next will completely change everything you think about faith, about Jesus, and even about what comes after death. If this has already given you goosebumps, stay with me until the end. There are things I still can't explain, and if you feel like you need to hear this story until the very last second, leave a like now. That way YouTube understands that this message needs to reach more people. Oh, and subscribe so you don't miss anything, because what comes next is powerful. The next thing I remember was darkness. A darkness so thick it seemed to embrace me from within. It wasn't like closing my eyes. It was different. It was as if I had been taken out of the world, and in the midst of this emptiness, I felt light. No weight, no pain, no body, just consciousness. Then something began to change. A glow appeared in the distance, very small but slowly growing. It was a soft, golden light that didn't hurt the eyes. I felt myself being pulled toward it, as if I were floating without fear. And suddenly I was there, in front of something I can't explain. I saw an open field, with colors so vivid they seemed to have a life of their own. I heard sounds that came from nowhere but rang directly inside me, and up ahead a figure. I wanted to say it was a man, but it wasn't just that. It was like all the love in the world had a form. He didn't speak. He just looked at me. And the moment our eyes met, I knew, I don't know how, but I knew it was Jesus. But he was not the Jesus of the crosses or ancient paintings. He did not have a long beard, a white tunic, or a crown of thorns. He was light. It was like an eternal hug that made me feel that for the first time I was truly home. I cried, but not with my eyes. It was as if my soul was crying for everything I never understood, for everything I denied. I couldn't speak, but he knew. He knew I never believed, and yet he looked at me with a compassion that dismantled me. He came closer, and when he reached out his hand, everything shook. Suddenly, everything began to disappear. The light faded, the field dissolved, and I was pulled back in. I remember a scream, someone shouting my name, "William, William!" I opened my eyes as a rush of air rushed through my chest. I was on the shore of the lake. A teacher was giving me CPR. My classmates were in shock. Paramedics were rushing in, and I was shaking. I had died. The doctors said my heart stopped for almost 3 minutes, but to me, it felt like an eternity. And I came back different, scared, confused, and with something inside me that no longer fit. I saw Jesus, and he wasn't what I thought. In the days that followed, everything seemed out of place. Still in the hospital, surrounded by machines and muffled voices, I stared at the white ceiling, trying to understand what had happened to me. The doctors said I was lucky. That, with 3 minutes without a heartbeat, I could have after effects. But I was whole. Whole on the outside because on the inside, I was a different person. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment, that place, that presence. During the early hours of the morning, when everyone was asleep, I relived everything in silence. The field, the light, the gaze of Jesus, the one I denied, mocked, ignored. How could someone I never recognized look at me like that? How could he welcome me without saying a word? And why was I sent back? That was what consumed me the most. I didn't ask to go back. I wanted to stay. But something, or someone, decided that I wasn't meant to be there yet. And now here, everything seemed grayer. School, friends, even the games I loved, nothing tasted the same. My mother noticed. She kept asking if everything was okay. I said yes, but avoided her gaze. I didn't know how to tell her. How could I tell two atheist teachers that their son had seen Jesus? One night, alone in my room, I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to draw what I saw, but I couldn't. Colors don't exist here. The light, there is no paint that can reproduce that. So I closed my eyes and cried. Not out of fear, but out of longing. Longing for a place I can't name. Longing for a love I had never felt before. I started to wonder, had other people been through this? Would anyone understand me? I wanted answers, but more than that, I needed to believe that I wasn't going crazy. That's when I started looking. Books, videos, anything that had to do with near-death experiences. And to my surprise, I wasn't the only one. Others had seen lights, fields, figures, love. Some had seen relatives, others had heard voices, but everyone had felt something similar. And that gave me strength. Maybe I didn't know exactly what happened to me. Maybe I didn't have all the answers. But I did know one thing. I wasn't the same William anymore. And from that moment on, my life would change in ways I could never have imagined. What scares me the most to this day is remembering the feeling of being pulled back. It wasn't like waking up from a dream. It was violent, cruel, as if I was floating in an ocean of peace and suddenly someone had swept me away by a raging current, thrown back into a body that no longer felt like mine. I remember the air tearing out of my throat as I breathed again. My eyes flew open with a sharp pain, and everything was blurry. Screams, cries, the muffled sound of the ambulance siren, hands touching me, shaking me. But the worst was the weight, a weight in my chest, in my heart, as if something had been left there on the other side. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. Inside me, an avalanche of emotions that couldn't fit in an 11-year-old boy. I saw something. I was somewhere, and no one here would believe it. In the ambulance, they tried to calm me down. A paramedic with kind eyes held my hand. She asked if I could remember what happened. I just nodded, still trying to figure out if it was all real. If I was alive, or if I was somehow still stuck between two worlds. At the hospital, the test said everything was normal. No brain damage, no medical explanation for the lucidity I had regained. But deep down, I knew. Something inside me had changed. Something profound, irreversible. My mother arrived in despair. When she saw me, she hugged me so tightly it hurt. My father remained silent, his gaze lost. They tried not to show it, but they were scared. Their son had died. For 3 minutes, I didn't exist. In the following days, I tried to live as before, eating, sleeping, going to school, but everything seemed wrong. My classmates' conversations seemed empty. Their laughter seemed forced. The teachers talked, but nothing made sense. I was there, but I wasn't. And deep down I asked myself, why me? Why me, the boy who mocked faith? Why me, who never believed, was led to him? I started writing everything down in a notebook. He was drawing the field, the light, the figure that I cannot call anything other than Jesus. I wrote loose sentences, disconnected memories. It was the only way not to go crazy. But the more I wrote, the more I needed to know. What was that? A hallucination? A dream? Or something bigger? Something that cannot be explained with logic or science? I knew that if I wanted to find the truth, I would have to go beyond what my parents, my teachers, or any book could tell me. And that's exactly what I decided to do. Coming home was weird. The same room, the same posters on the wall, the same pillow that always smelled. But I wasn't the same William anymore. It was like everything in there had shrunk. Even my own body seemed too small for everything I was feeling. The nights became long, not because of the fear of death, but because of the longing for what I had seen. I wanted to go back. I wanted to understand. And more than anything, I wanted to talk to someone. But who? I tried to come clean with my parents. I didn't tell them everything. I just said that I felt something when I was unconscious. They listened, but exchanged quick glances, as if trying to remain calm in the face of what seemed like a child's imagination. My father said, "It's normal. The brain makes things up when it's in pain." My mother just smiled and said that I needed to rest. But that wasn't an invention. I knew it. I lived it. And every time they looked at me as if I was exaggerating, the more I kept quiet. At school, things got worse. Some of my classmates came to hug me, relieved that I was okay, but I couldn't act like I used to. I saw everything differently. Conversations seemed like noise. The topics were superficial. Even the teachers seemed distant to me, as if I were watching life from behind a glass window. And the nightmares began. Intense dreams. I was floating again. I saw the field. I saw the light, but I could never reach her. He always woke up the moment I reached out, sweaty, breathless, with a mixture of fear and longing that I can't explain. My head became a battlefield. Reason said it was just imagination. But my heart screamed that it had been real. I started to wonder, how many other people have been through this? How many have seen something and been disbelieved, silenced? What if this experience wasn't just for me? What if I have to speak out? So, if you have ever been through something similar, or know someone who has, comment here. Maybe, just maybe, you are carrying a story that the world needs to hear. I'm not the skeptical William anymore, but I still don't know what I believe. I just know that after what I saw, I can't live like I used to, and I needed to understand. I needed answers, truths that cannot be found in books. That's when my search began. The first thing I did was hide in the school library. It was the only place I could disappear without arousing suspicion. Nobody was looking for me there. Between dusty bookshelves and absolute silence, I began my hunt. But it wasn't for adventure or distraction. I was looking for meaning. I opened my computer's browser and typed in near-death experience. Within seconds, thousands of results appeared. Blogs, articles, videos, forums. I started clicking on everything, without any criteria. Most of them seemed like fabrications, but among them, some stories made me stop. A boy in Norway had seen a place similar to the one I saw. A woman in California described a figure of light that did not speak, but transmitted absolute love. A man in Argentina was enveloped by a peace so profound that he cried just remembering it. I was not alone. I spent hours reading, watching, and taking notes. Each testimony made me feel less isolated, but it also raised new questions. Why are these experiences so similar across cultures? Why do so many people report the presence of a loving figure? Many say it is Jesus, even though they have never believed. I returned home full of doubts. I began to search through the books on my parents' bookshelf, looking for any scientific references to the subject, and I found some. Neurology, psychology, neuroscience. They all tried to explain the phenomenon as a product of a collapsing brain. They spoke of a lack of oxygen, fragmented memories, and induced hallucinations, but none of these explanations could explain what I felt. It wasn't just an image. It was a place, a presence, a certainty. Something so real that I would trust it more than the ground beneath my feet right now. And that's when a question struck me, like a bolt of lightning. If all of that wasn't a hallucination, then what is reality? I began to doubt everything. Math tests, news, the certainties I had been taught. For the first time, I understood what it was like to live in conflict between what the world says and what my heart feels. That night, I locked myself in my room and rewrote everything in my notebook. This time not as a diary, but like a map, a guide to what was to come, because I knew if I wanted answers that no one around me could give me, I would have to look for them in places no one around me dared to look. And so began my true journey. Not for faith, not for religion, but for truth. It was on a cold Tuesday morning that I returned to the hospital. Not for a consultation. I needed to talk to someone who might understand. Someone who had heard stories like mine before. That's when I remembered the hospital chaplain, a grey-bearded gentleman with a quiet voice, who I'd barely noticed during the days I'd been hospitalized. I found him in the small room next to the chapel. He was sitting there reading a book when I raised my hand with a shy hi. He looked over his glasses, smiled and said, "William, right?" I remember you." That surprised me. We sat down. He didn't ask any immediate questions or try to comfort me. He just waited, and I spoke. I told him everything, from the moment the water took me until the moment I came back with that look, that light, that presence. I spoke with a trembling voice, like someone reliving a dream that still hurts, and he listened, in silence, without judging, without interrupting. When I finished, he was silent for a while. Then he said, "William, you have no idea how many stories like yours I've heard here. From children, adults, the elderly, people who never believed in anything, people who believed too much, and when they all come back, they come back different." My eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from relief. Finally, someone understood me. He continued, "I won't try to tell you what it was. That's between you and God. But I can guarantee you one thing. You saw something that many people search for their entire lives without finding, and now you'll carry that with you forever." We talked for almost an hour. He told about a man who saw his own dead mother, from a 5-year-old girl who described heaven as a place without time, from a blind woman who during her NDE described details of the room she was in, even though she had never seen in her life. Each story left me more fascinated, more convinced that what I experienced was not an illusion. Before I left, the chaplain handed me a small brown notebook. He said, "Don't just write what you saw, write what it did to you. Because sometimes what we feel is truer than anything that can be proven." I returned home with the notebook clutched to my chest. That day, I realized that my journey was not about understanding everything. It was about feeling, about accepting that there are mysteries that do not need answers, only presence. And that was the first time I felt peace. I decided it was time to tell. Little by little, I tried to share what I had experienced with some people close to me. Not everything, just parts. I started with my best friend, Sarah. She was always sweet, curious, open, but when I told her I had seen Jesus, she laughed. She thought I was joking. When she realized I was serious, the laughter disappeared and the silence fell between us like a wall. She said, "That doesn't sound like you, William." And then I understood that maybe I wasn't that me anymore. I told 2 other colleagues. One of them just listened to me and changed the subject. The other said, "Dude, you had a delusion, it happens." The sentence kept going around in my head. Delirium. What hurt me wasn't the skepticism, it was contempt, the disregard for something that marked me so much, that hurt me, that healed me. When I told my parents in more detail with more courage, the mood in the room changed. My father crossed his arms. My mother stood, fidgeting. They said I was impressionable, that maybe it was trauma. They recommended I see a therapist. It was like screaming in a desert. Little by little, I became silent again, saving everything. I withdrew. I stopped trying to explain. I started walking around with headphones on, even without music, just to avoid conversation. I sat alone in the playground. I even avoided the mirror, because I didn't like the look of who I had become. Not because he didn't like me, but because no one else seemed to see this new me. Isolation hurts. And when you feel invisible, you start to doubt your own existence. You start to think, did I make all this up? Did my mind betray me? But all you had to do was close your eyes, and there was the field, the light, the gaze. The memory came back to me in its entirety, like a sacred film that only I could watch, and it saved me. It reminded me that, even alone, I had seen something that no one could take away from me. That's when I decided to write online, not as William. I created an anonymous profile and started posting excerpts from my notebook on NDE forums. And then, things changed. People started responding, some with similar stories, some with questions, and some just saying, "I believe in you." 3 simple words that fell like balm on my tired chest. I wasn't as alone as I thought. And it was in this virtual space, hidden from the real world, that I realized my pain could connect. My story, rejected by those around me, could welcome someone who, on the other side of the screen, was as lost as I was. But something was still missing. Something bigger. Because no matter how much the world outside had silenced me, my heart had not given up speaking, and it was time to listen to what he had to tell me. After I started sharing my writing anonymously, something inside me opened up. It was as if I was wiping away a fogged-up window. Every word written, every response received, every story exchanged, brought me closer to a truth that I still couldn't name. But writing was no longer enough. I needed to feel. I needed to see. I needed to understand with my body what my soul was already whispering in the darkness. That was when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to explore all possible forms of spirituality, not to choose a religion, but to discover where, among so many voices, was that presence that called me back from death. The first stop was a Buddhist temple outside Asheville. I went alone on a grey Saturday. I didn't talk to anyone. I just walked in, took off my shoes, and sat on the floor. The smell of incense, the silence, the soft sound of the wind chimes, it all seemed to say, "In here, you can just be." I meditated for the first time, and in the silence, I felt something move inside me. It wasn't the same as what I had experienced in that light, but it was an echo, a distant, familiar whisper. The following week, I walked into an evangelical church with a distant aunt. The music was loud, the faces were fervent. When everyone began to pray out loud, I froze. I felt fear. Then a wave of heat, a pressure in my chest. A tear fell, not because I understood, but because I felt. I also went to a Catholic Mass. At the end, I knelt down, even though I didn't know how to pray. I just closed my eyes and said silently, "If you're still there, show me again." I began visiting places of faith as if searching through ruins in search of treasure. Synagogues, spiritualist centers, even a healing circle with an indigenous group. In each place, a part of me was healed. A crack was closed, and little by little I realized that it didn't matter what they called that light. Jesus, spirit, energy, source. It was real, and it was everywhere there was love. One autumn afternoon, I returned to the lake, the same one where everything happened. I sat at the water's edge and was silent. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't expect anything. I was just there. And it was at that moment that I understood. My journey was not about choosing a path. It was about walking, about being in motion, and in the middle of the road, recognizing the signs of that presence that one day looked at me and forgave me for never having believed. I was still just an 11-year-old boy, but I had already lived more than most people live in a lifetime, and there was still much more to come. Reconciliation did not come suddenly. It crept in slowly, like morning light that enters through the cracks in the window without asking permission. After so many searches, after visiting so many places, I realized that the biggest wound was still not spiritual. It was human. I carried the pain of not being believed, of being ignored, silenced. And that pain still kept me trapped. But life sometimes finds unexpected ways to set us free. It was a regular Wednesday in the school cafeteria that everything began to change. I was alone, as usual. But that afternoon, a boy named Micah, someone I barely knew, sat down next to me. He didn't say anything, he just ate in silence. At the end of the meal, he said, "I read that text of yours on the forum. I know it's you." My heart stopped for a second. I thought about denying it, but he continued. "My sister had an NDE last year. She was in a coma for 2 days. She also saw someone, a woman in white. She has never been the same since, and neither have we. We stayed there for almost half an hour." He talked about his sister, about the guilt he felt for not having believed her at the beginning, and for the first time, I felt listened to by someone who didn't want to understand with reason, but with the heart. After that day, Micah and I started talking more. He introduced me to a small online group of teenagers who had also been through similar experiences. It wasn't a religion. It wasn't a cult. It was just a safe space. And that, at that moment, was worth more than any temple. Over time, I allowed myself to talk to more people. I told my mother again, this time differently, without expectations, without fear. She cried. She said she didn't know how to react before, that she was sorry. And that, even without understanding, she believed in me. My father was the last, still skeptical, still rational. But when he read my notebook, yes, the brown notebook the chaplain had given me, he was silent for minutes. Then he said, "You saw something I can never prove, but I also can't deny what it did to you." This was the most difficult reconciliation, and the most necessary. With them, with others, but mainly with myself. Because I blamed myself for having come back, for having left behind that light, that peace. But there, in that silent embrace with my father, I realized maybe my return had a purpose. Maybe my mission was exactly that, to live to tell, to live to remember. to live to help others who, like me, also felt alone with something they couldn't explain. And for the first time since that day at the lake, I slept peacefully. For a long time, my experience lived in silence, hidden in the pages of a brown notebook and in whispered conversations, as if it were a secret too sacred for the world to understand. But one day, something inside me changed. I was sitting on the porch, looking up at the sky, when I felt that presence again. Not like at the lake, not with lights or visions. It was different. It was like a soundless whisper that said, "Now, it's time." It was then that I decided I was going to tell it, in full, with courage. I started by recording a video. I didn't want it to be a performance. It was just me, a camera, and the truth. I spoke looking straight into the lens as if I were talking to myself. I told everything, from the fall into the lake to the light, from Jesus' gaze to the return, from the silence, the pain, the search, the reconciliation. I recorded without cuts, without rehearsal, and I posted it. I closed my laptop and went to sleep, shivering. The next day, everything changed. Hundreds of comments, then thousands. People saying, "You told my story. Now I know I'm not crazy. Thanks for making me feel less alone." And then others saying, "That's a lie. He's just looking for attention." Another childish delusion. But those, they didn't affect me anymore, because I knew who I was and what I had experienced. And for the first time, I realized that my pain had become a bridge, that my story, once a source of isolation, was now a connection. I was invited to give a talk at a school in the neighboring town. Afterwards, a group of young people asked me to tell them about what I experienced in a local church. Every time I spoke, I felt as if part of that light that had surrounded me was touching me again. Every word was a reunion. I am not a preacher. I have not become religious, but I have discovered that when you speak the truth, the world listens, and more than that, the world feels. Even Sarah, my old friend, wrote to me, "You said you watched the video. Who cried? Who felt bad for laughing?" And now she was also asking herself, what if? I didn't want to convert anyone. I don't want you to believe what I saw. I just want you to know there is more between heaven and earth than we have been told. And sometimes the invisible is revealed in the eyes of a boy who for 3 minutes died and came back with a mission. And this mission is not to prove anything. It's just counting. Today, when I look in the mirror, I still see an 11-year-old boy. But inside it's as if I've lived centuries. As if every minute of those 3 that I was on the other side had aged me in wisdom and rejuvenated me in faith. Not a blind faith, but a living faith, breathing, pulsing in every cell of mine. Coming back from that experience gave me something I never had. Purpose, not in the heroic sense. I'm not a saint. I still make mistakes, I still get confused, I still have days when everything seems too much. But now I know why I wake up. I know why I breathe. Because every second here is a gift I've been given. A second half that many don't have. Today I speak to children and teenagers who have gone through similar experiences. I receive messages from people all over the world. People who have seen the light. People who have seen the void. People who have returned and don't know what to do with it. And I listen, like the chaplain listened to me, without judging, without trying to explain, because sometimes what we need most is someone who just says, "I believe in you." People ask me if I would go back there, if I could, if I would choose the light, the countryside, that look. And the answer is yes, of course I would. But now I know that the reason for coming back is stronger than the desire to leave. I came back to tell you, to remember that there is more, that there is love beyond what meets the eye, that there is life, even after death. And more than that, I came back to live. Not as someone who fears the end, but as someone who has known the other side and, even so, chose to be here. If you've made it this far, know this. You're part of this. Every person who hears this story helps keep the flame of what I saw alive, helps spread this light, which wasn't just mine, but all of ours. Today, I know that Jesus is not what I thought. He is not a name, he is not a figure. He is pure love, he is the embrace without judgment. He is the hand that holds yours when everything falls apart. And even if you don't believe, he believes in you. This is the story of how an atheist boy died, saw Jesus and came back transformed. And this story now is yours too. If at any point in this story You felt something different, a chill, a warmth in your chest, a voice inside you that whispered, "I am here." Then maybe, just maybe, you too heard the voice of God. And if this touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now, because stories like this are not just to be heard, they are to be lived, shared, felt. And if you've made it this far to this last minute, comment below, "I also saw the light." I want to know who walked with me until the end of this journey. Also leave your like, not because of the algorithm, but because this gesture shows that this message found a home in your heart. The next video is already appearing on the screen. And if you felt all of this up to this point, what comes next may touch you even deeper. Click now, because there's something there waiting for you.